Welcome to Outside the Studio. Hi, Jamie. How are you today?
Good. How are you, Tessa?
I'm good. I am so excited for today's episode. This is a three-peat guest. We're having Jill Rose, my beautiful, lovely friend, back on the podcast. And I love talking to Jill for so many reasons, but this episode is pretty special to me because we talk about things that are near and dear to my heart in the way of aging and the kind of the taboo subjects, or I'm feeling like they're a little bit less taboo now, but when I was younger, it did feel like subjects of women's health, menstruating age, menopause age, everything in between felt a little bit of like a taboo subject. So I love this episode because Jill and I just dive into it and we talk about Jill's having an experience of going through perimenopause, and I don't think I'm that far off. I did just have a hysterectomy, so that's been a whole unique health journey in and of itself. And I think where I'd like to start, Jamie, is just hearing your thoughts on maybe these subjects as a whole. If you have any thoughts on, becoming a woman, coming into your menstruating age, what that felt like for you, and also what you think about in terms of, you're young, so you're long decades off from even having to worry about things like gray hair and going through menopause.
Totally.
But I'm just curious, when you hear these things, if you talk about them with your friends, what do you think about?
Yeah, I feel like being a younger person like in the 21st century, I feel like that to begin with because like for example, even just the trend of like dyeing your hair gray, like platinum gray or just going full gray, like that's like a fashion trend, sort of thing, which I feel like is now more of a modern thing and making it less taboo of like, oh, people can have gray hair because that's kind of a natural thing. Whereas I feel like previously in like past trends it was like that was not the thing, sort of thing. So I feel like, I mean, we're still a ways off from making any sort of like, I feel like we're still a ways off from making the graceful aging for women to be a thing, because like for example for men it's like, oh, to be like a silver fox or whatever, or like having that like pepper whatever, like that's like it's like an attractive thing for men, sort of thing, whereas for women it's like that's not such a thing, which we're definitely a ways off from making that less taboo and whatnot. But in terms of like, I feel like for growing up, I grew up like I was raised very like traditional, so like talking about menstruation in public or with your friends was like something that was not really talked about for me. Like it just wasn't something, like it wasn't until I was like about to get my first period that my mom even like brought up that sort of like subject. I remember being like a little kid and like I remember the subject being brought up, but no one ever explained it to me. Like it was just like, it was so, which is crazy because it's not like I was like a little girl, like that was something I was supposed to be expecting. So that's something that it can be still frustrating in terms of like even menstruation that every woman on the planet does, is still seen as like a hush hush topic. So that's like my personal experience with it. I think that just talk about it. It's a completely normal thing. I feel like there's very little that we shouldn't be talking about in general. So
I think it's so interesting because you're right. Like, there's a lot to be said around the topic of we don't prepare our young women very well for womanhood. And it's crazy to me that every single woman is going to go through this inevitably, and we don't have the conversation to let them know. I've heard women tell stories about, they thought they were dying when they got their first period because they're bleeding. And that's scary if you're not prepared for it. And the pain that comes with it and the stigma around this idea of quote unquote PMS being a normal part of your monthly process, which is actually not the case. There's actually more recent scientific evidence out there now. Actually, in The Flow, Alyssa Vritti talks about that in her book. Those symptoms are significant of something being off in terms of a hormonal imbalance. We're not meant to experience that level of pain or symptoms during your period. But as women, we're just used to suffering in silence. I hate to say it that way, but it's true. And honestly, it's like,
no, it is true, and it's unfortunate.
Yeah, it is unfortunate, and it's it's frustrating. I wondered though, Jamie, my question for you as a follow-up is, um, what do you wish your mom would have said, or maybe it wouldn't be your mom, but some other female, what do you wish would have happened?
Right. I was actually going to bring up the point. My mom was visiting me a few weeks ago, and I have a book called The Vagina Book. It's like by, I think the brand Thinks is like who it's by, but it's just like it's a book about periods and a book about women's health and just like the anatomy in general. And my mom, she's very traditional. That's always the word I use for her. But she was like, "Why do you have this?" And I was like, "What do you mean? Why do I have this? Like, this is like an educational book, and just like I learned things in there that like I didn't like really necessarily know about, or like definitely didn't learn about like in school. I went to like a private like religious based school, and so those were things that were just like simply not talked about. So I feel like something that would have been nice had my mom or some sort of feminine figure like brought up would have been just like simply making it normal to talk about. And I feel like that goes for many subjects for me, where it's like, hey, this is just something that everyone goes through. It's just like what questions do you have? Just making it, I feel like, not be like okay, like this is a weird subject we're going to talk about for a few minutes and then we're not going to bring up again. I would much rather appreciate it had it been like a dinner table, like, just a regular day conversation, sort of thing, rather than making it feel like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm supposed to get weird when I ask questions or anything. So
Yeah. Or the idea that, okay, we're going to talk about it once very awkwardly, and then you're not allowed to ask any follow-up questions, to me is
right,
mind-blowing.
totally. Or if you do ask another question,
I'm
it's
like,
like it
what?
feels left field, sort of thing. So
Uh-huh.
um
Yeah, which is so that's just it's endlessly fascinating to me. And I've said this before on the podcast, but I was lucky in that both of my parents were very open with me about that, and actually it was more celebratory. I got a cake. I think I got flowers or balloons or something like
that
that. So I
is
always really
so
embraced
beautiful. You know what I
my
mean? Like
parents.
it is something to be embraced, because it's like it's you coming into basically entering adulthood at that
Mhm.
point. Like it's another milestone. Yeah, I didn't even get to. I still had to go to school. Like it was like I didn't even get the
Yeah.
school day off or anything. So, um, yeah,
Well,
I feel
did
like
you so at that age, did you find solace or the ability to talk with your peers about that? Was it
yeah, I
helpful
think
in that
so.
way?
Yeah, because like about middle school age, I don't remember exactly what grade. I think probably seventh or eighth grade or something like that. And yeah, I feel because I feel like there's finally a camaraderie,
Mhm.
especially since like at that age, like usually girls are talking whether or not like have they had like their first or not. So I feel like in that way, I felt like I found more solace in my peers and my fellow like friends, like at school, rather than admittedly in my own mother, sort of thing. Which I know is not. It's probably a much more common case than, we probably like to admit that is.
I think it is. I don't have no idea what the statistics are, but it's a story I've heard before. It's not an uncommon story for sure.
Totally.
And I think my heart goes out to the mothers too that don't have a vernacular around it, who feel awkward talking about it themselves, and that must be challenging
Oh yeah, because I'm sure their
to
mothers
be
didn't talk about it nearly as much
exactly.
as even they did, sort of thing. So I mean, they're working with what they
Exactly.
got. So
Yes.
yeah,
So thank you, mothers. We appreciate
yeah,
you.
yeah,
And I know you tried your best.
absolutely.
Um, I do want to touch it. You mentioned silver hair and us being a way off from embracing the grays, and that I was literally just thinking that yesterday. Well, I can't remember what I was watching. Oh, I've been binge watching the show Jane the Virgin. I don't know if you've ever
Yeah,
heard of it.
I've
It's
heard of it,
just
but I haven't seen it.
it's so silly. It's hilarious, and I just love it. It's like my shameless binge. It's kind of like a telenovela, which I don't know if you've ever watched a soap
Yeah,
opera,
yeah,
but
totally. Yeah, it's your comfort show. Yeah,
telenovelas are just like one step
yeah.
above a soap opera. And there's so much humor in it, and I can relate to a lot of it. But I was realizing that these characters, that one of them is an older character, he's kind of like the silver fox, and his adjacent partner, who's about the same age as him, doesn't have a single gray hair on her head, which is just obviously not real. And so but as I go out into, the real world, this is TV, right? So take that and compare it to going out into the real world. I'm noticing women of my age who are embracing the grays, and it gives me so much heart to see that, and also look in the mirror and like I could see my grays coming in and embrace that with a sense of like, "Oh, well, maybe that is beautiful. Who sets the standard of beauty anyways?" They say the cliche is it's in the eye of the beholder. And I'd really love to be able to age. Jill and I talk about this a lot about, aging and going through menopause and that whole conversation around hormone replacement therapy. But very closely related to that is our self image, and as women in particular, how we see ourselves as we age. So, Jamie, I was curious to also hear your perspective on, you know, seeing women go through that change, seeing women with gray hairs, seeing women
Absolutely.
a little
Right.
bit less likely to dye their hair.
Right. Well, it's funny because my mom, she is starting to get more gray hairs and everything, and but she has like a very like negative outlook on that. But I still look at her and I'm like, because she's my mom, obviously, like I still look at her and think she's beautiful. And there's like she looks at it as like, oh, it's just white or gray or whatnot. But I'm like, oh, but I also see silver in it, which is also like it's got like a beautiful shine to it. Like her hair is still healthy, sort of thing. She still has like a thick head of hair, and whatnot. Um, so I feel like it's I mean, I feel like it's another of that like camaraderie thing. Also, like because like as a woman, I'm always supporting women. Like, there's no part of me that is gonna look at a woman and have a judgmental sort of aspect to it, just because, um, like there's no need for that, sort of thing. I feel like I am not chronically online at all, so I feel like that's another thing that really helps me for my own personal like sort of outlook and how I look at beauty because I feel like because I'm not chronically online, I have a more natural outlook, sort of thing in terms of like what beauty and aging is supposed to look like. Um, I find it like something I don't want for anyone is to like look at wrinkles or look at a natural thing and be like, oh, this like feeling like they're lesser than, sort of thing. I feel like there's power in age. I feel like that means that you're older, wiser, you survived, all these things. Um, so I find it frustrating because I know that in my future, as I get older, I might wake up one day and be like, "Oh God, I have all these grays," and maybe feel like a need to like change them in some way, or like, I'm in my early 20s, but I am looking at my face and I'm like, "Oh, my face is already starting to get a few wrinkles," and I'm like, "I'm in my early 20s, like I shouldn't be looking at my face and like scrutinizing it already," sort of thing.
All right. Well, without further ado, here's our conversation with the beautiful, lovely Jill Rose. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Outside the Studio. This is Tessa. I am joined by my very special friend and kind of slash co-host, multiple time guest, Jill Rose. Jill Rose is a life coach. She specializes in working with women as a life coach, and she's also an amazing baker. You're a three-peat guest. I mean, you're practically my co-host.
Oh my
And
God, I'm your Ed McMahon. You know
yes,
that's my goal. Yeah.
yes.
You just wait. I mean, I'm going to be like hiding in the closet on all of your podcasts and be like in the background photobombing them.
Well, you're more than welcome to do that as long as I can get a reliable software service to work. So anyone who's in the podcast realm that's listening, man, I am just going through it with technology, and I'd welcome some recommendations about what you use and what works best. And I think, what's interesting, Jill, is okay. I keep thinking about this. It's going from corporate work world to entrepreneurship. We all know that's something I've done, and with that comes many things, right? You have freedom to create your own schedule. You can work when you want to, but basically that means you're working all the time. Otherwise, you're not getting paid. There's one thing. You can work in shorter chunks and work like not a traditional 8-hour work week, but I mean, yeah, it just comes with its pros and cons. But the one thing that I'm really suffering through right now is the lack of tech support. There's all of these new software systems that are supposed to be user friendly and seamless integration. And when something goes wrong with one of those softwares and I reach out to tech support, it's never a real person live. There's no phone number I can call. Yeah. And it's this really delayed back and forth, either chat or email that just is so taxing and it takes so much time. And so I'm suffering as a podcast producer, host, and content producer. It is hard, and I'm questioning my life choices right now.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I feel like that is like a cosmic metaphor. You know what I mean? Like the disconnect, the disconnection, the inability to have like call and response to, which is like what we are, what we as human beings, especially as women, like we're so relational. It is, we go to our tribes, we go to our community. It is how we seek support. And in this digital age, it's about as hands off as you can get. I mean, it's so interesting as you're talking. I was thinking like, this is my work. This is my passion to help women find peace as they step into their power, which more often than not looks like transitioning careers that they've been, whether that is corporate or in parenthood or whatever that looks like. But boy, you lose me when you start talking about technology.
Yeah, it's hard. It's so hard because I've always had in the corporate work world that setup usually looks like you have an IT department. So if your
Yeah,
computer gets a virus or if it stops working or if it's running slow, you
yeah,
need to clean it up, clear cache, whatever it is, they're there to help hold your hand through it. And you have to know how to speak tech. You have to know how to kind of navigate directions and instructions with an IT support person for that specific software. And it is just like, I feel like I'm doing this inside of a vacuum with
yeah.
the lights off and no way out.
Right, right.
Uh, so that's my rant about technology and the lack of
Oh, it's
kind of like a
frustrating.
human connection there. Yeah, it
Yeah,
is.
it's frustrating. I mean, all I want to ask is um something about easy. Like what if it were easy? What if money and time and all the different things came in? What if it just were easy and like an exhale? What would it look like?
Mm. I mean, I wouldn't have to struggle with uh, being literally, I'm in the middle of a podcast every single time I record lately, and it'll stop recording. I get an error
Mm,
message. It's the same error message I'm getting. So that wouldn't happen.
yeah,
Uh,
like you would outsource that or you would have a different platform or like what if that was just like taken off your plate and somebody else did it for you? Like,
I
or tell
mean,
me this.
yeah,
Okay, look
how
at
do
me.
I
I'm
do
going to
that?
coach you, my friend. What is it that you love about the podcast? Why are you doing the podcast?
Well, I like to have these conversations
Yeah,
when I can have the conversation.
yeah,
And it's hard to be present in the conversation when, I can't record it.
yeah, yeah. Or
Because
you're
that is the
worrying
issue.
about it glitching or,
Yes. Yeah.
yeah.
So I love to have these conversations. I love to talk to people. I get to talk to people from all over the world, from all different realms of expertise and study, ranging from health to the mystical to tarot to spirituality, science backed
Yeah.
developments with Alzheimer's and dementia, that kind of stuff. I just love to learn and grow and be in community with people. And so maybe it looks more like going back to doing it analog, being in person. I don't know. Maybe it means being in person.
Hmm.
Um, it just feels like there's got to be a way to simplify it. And I don't know
Yeah.
if the answer is continually switching recording software platforms.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think at least what I've found is that the simpler the choice, the better the choice is. I think, um, again, technology is not my realm unless you had like maybe you dedicated a couple shows to technology and then you could kind of build in your own IT support and be like, hey, while we're on it, could you share how you would handle this as it glitches? Maybe you could
Yeah.
like kill a couple birds with one stone there. I hate that turn of phrase, but you could do that. But I also think, I don't know. I mean, I turned 53 this year, which is just mind blowing to me. And I think what I can say most emphatically about this stage in my life is that um, if at any point I feel like I am pushing a boulder up a hill, it's not the right choice for me. If I am forcing a square peg into a round hole, it is not the choice for me. Um, and as a result, and certainly this comes with privilege, right? I'm going to qualify that quite a bit. My
Mhm.
children are all grown. I am an empty nester. I have a partner. Blah blah blah. But I do find that the quality of my life has just increased so beautifully when I stopped pushing so hard for an outcome, and I just kind of let it flow, and I was able, and that's not just like professionally and technically and all that, but that's like relationally too. I'm just, life feels sweeter when it's simpler.
Mhm. Yeah. That's so true, Jill. I really appreciate that perspective. And when we were discussing about coming back together on the podcast, I think it was before my surgery. I just came back
Yeah.
from, quote unquote, I just came back from surgery. I mean, when I say that, I mean, I came back to kind of like a full-time working schedule just this week. And the simplification of, like, for example, just not even wearing a watch for about a month and not even remembering, what day of the week it was because there wasn't a weekend for me.
Yeah.
That was really nice. And
Was it hard to adjust to that?
the first couple of weeks were kind of like spent in a fog of drug-induced
Recovery. Yeah.
haze and pain
Yeah.
and just like, oh my God, what did I do? Did I choose? Was this the
Yeah.
right decision? And so the first 2 weeks, it wasn't hard in that respect. The second 2 weeks when I started to feel better and I felt like, well, I should be doing something. I should be moving my body. I should be, quote unquote, getting ahead with my work because I'm going to be so far behind by the time that's when
Yeah.
it's hard mentally, I think. And I'm
Yeah. All
such an
of that
active
kicks
person.
in. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And even this week, as I start to kind of ramp back up, I'm like, oh God, here we go again. And, this is the life I chose. So it's kind of like that. Well, I chose this, so I should suffer through it. But I
Yeah.
appreciate your
Suck it up.
perspective
Yeah.
that it doesn't have to be, maybe if you're pushing the boulder up the hill, that time off where you realized you were actually pushing a boulder up a hill for however many years, maybe it is time to choose a different path or let something go that's that arduous. So
there's so much cultural context to why we want to push a boulder up the hill. I mean, so much, and I won't bore you with like, I won't stand on my soapbox too much, but a
no,
little
please
bit I will.
do.
I'll
That's
get
what
up there
this
a
is
little
for.
bit.
Yeah.
There is so much cultural pressure to strive and to achieve, and especially for women, right? Like, and you and I've talked a lot about this. Like, we live in this society, this Western based society, capitalism, right, where our value really revolves around achievement and productivity. You compound that by being a woman who's already socialized to kind of do everything for everybody else before she even considers herself, right? So you kind of have this double whammy of already needing to be productive to feel of value. And now we're going to complicate that by all of that productivity goes out and not in. And so there's some very legitimate reasons why, even if you're laying in the hospital bed going, okay, where's my watch? I need to, it's time to start ramping it up. Work is collecting, right? Like there is some very significant, real, legitimate reasons for why we feel that way. The thing that I have come to find, and I really live my life by, and I coach my clients on, and, I stand on rooftops and like shouted is, it's not nature's way. It's not like, it's not how we're meant to be. This is a cultural box within we live, and it's not actually in alignment very often with our natural cadences and rhythms. And that's why that you use the word suffering. That's suffering, right? I mean, there's pain and then there's suffering, and suffering is the meaning we give to whatever it is that, the experiences that we're having that are so uncomfortable. And I just, I feel like if we had more conversations, if we had more insight and that was more illuminated, like, God, guys, this is culture. This isn't like you're doing something wrong. There is this whole push, and there are very good reasons for that push, to keep us in line, right? But that is not where our truth and our health and our well-being and our peace of mind and our joy come from, right? It always comes from falling back in line with our own truth. And I think what happens is that there's not enough information or conversation around that. So we end up feeling really crummy about ourselves, like we're falling short. And there was my TED Talk for you for today.
Well, I do have a follow-up question about that, because I agree with you 100%. And then I go, okay, well, then how do we get ourselves, yeah, we understand intellectually that this is cultural construct. We understand intellectually that it's a social way of being that it's basically ingrained. I mean, you're 53, I'm 40 something. I can't remember how old I am. 41, I think. I stopped counting after 25, I think. So I have to ask
I
my
tell you,
partner.
your 50s, it just gets better. I did too. And then 50 hit, and I was like, oh, I'm going to start counting again. I like this.
What's the emu oil,
It's the
right?
emu oil. Yeah. I love that you remember
If you
that.
don't
Yeah.
get that reference, you have to go back and listen to the
Oh,
last episode that Jill and I
oh
did.
my gosh.
Because I look at you and I'm like, oh, you look younger than I do. So you're doing something right.
Thank you. I appreciate that, but boy, I was just thinking the same about you.
Oh,
Right.
you're sweet.
When you're not glitching, when you're not
When I'm
blurring.
not glitchy. Yeah, when I'm not frozen in
Picture
like
of
a
beauty.
weird look.
Yeah. So your follow-up question was, intellectually we know this, but how do we get our
Yeah.
heart and soul and body and everybody else on board with it?
Yeah.
Is
Well,
that
and I
what it
mean,
is?
I think regardless of getting everyone else on board, because I don't think we ever will, it's the hardest person to convince is ourselves that change needs to
Yeah.
be made. Because we convince ourselves, oh, I'm stuck here. I can
Yeah.
tell myself, oh, I'm stuck with this podcast because I chose to leave the corporate world, and now this is what I'm doing for a living. And that whole conversation about
Yeah.
just like
Yeah.
suck it up, buttercup. But I know that's not true. I know I can pivot, and I've seen other people do it, but there's something that's holding me back from
Yeah.
making a change that may or may not be not the end of suffering, but it might be more my true nature. What is it that
Yeah.
makes it so hard for us to, even consider the possibility that something else could be better, something else could be more
Mm.
freeing? And then
Mm.
actually taking that step to do that work, I think
Yeah.
is the even harder thing. Maybe not.
Gosh, I'm reminded of that Marianne Williamson quote, like, our greatest fear isn't our failure, it's our success,
Mm.
right? I mean, um, fear, absolutely. And our most fundamental fear is not belonging, right? Not having connection. And if we do anything that upsets the apple cart, that is different, that steps outside of the box, we risk that. We risk our sense of belonging. And I think if you were to peel back all of the various layers, it really usually comes down to, what if I'm not liked? What if I disappoint somebody? What if they don't love me anymore? Right? That, and again, there are like biological reasons for that one, like, a very, very beginning of time when humans, originated, we relied on community for survival, right? Shelter and food and all of that stuff. And so it's really, it is in our DNA, and that has progressed. Obviously we're not so reliant at that level, but we certainly are for a sense of belonging. So it's fundamentally fear. It's interesting too. I think about like the stuckness. Like when you might not know this personally. I don't really know anybody who knows this personally, but the whole thing with quicksand is, if you're in quicksand and you fight and you resist and you're scrambling to get out, you sink, right? The only way out of quicksand is to let go and to stop and to move really slowly. And that's how people survive quicksand. And I think about that. I think about that all the time in life too, So I guess the question was, how do we kind of, what prevents us from doing it? It's this fundamental fear, this programmed fear within us of ultimately not belonging, right? Being alone, and there's not a bigger hurt in the world for us, right? Um, and I am here to tell you that if you can stop resisting the quicksand, your people come, your right people come, and they match the vibrancy and the energy and the vision that it is that you're longing for.
Well, in your work with women, what I'm sure, I shouldn't say I'm sure. I'm wondering if women come to you with this kind of theme of feeling stuck in whatever it is, maybe it's career, relationship, and feeling like they don't know what the first step is, and
Yeah.
maybe you've had the opportunity to work with a woman through that first step, and then what's the next step? And
Yeah.
have you seen that transformation take place?
Yeah.
Have you found some sort? We always want to find a formula, right? Oh,
Yeah.
what is the
The
formula
3
for this?
steps to,
Yeah.
yeah. You know what? I mean, yes, I have. It's why I have a job. I would say that is the singular biggest reason my clients see me, is because they're stuck. They've been at something that they thought they should be doing, they were told they should be doing, and at some point, they are suffering. It hurts to be in this, and yet they don't know where it is they should be, and two, then all the ramifications of transitioning, right? We referenced my Gabber earlier, and it's funny because I'm gonna quote her again. But she used to say, "One step, one step. It is just one step, one step." And so I do actually have sort of a step-by-step formula, and because it's what's worked for me. And what I always say to my clients is, listen, like, I don't know the answer. I can't tell you what podcast platform to use. I can't tell you like what job to take. I don't know, but I believe you know. And so my role is always connecting my clients with that seed of their own wisdom, because that will never steer them wrong. That will always place them in the right direction. And so I always begin with quieting, exercises that quiet the external, where that inside voice, as I call it, can begin to emerge. And we can begin to have conversation with it and understand it, and begin to familiarize ourselves with it, I guess. And then the second component is, once we have created maybe a relationship with that inside voice, how do we regulate ourselves? And this is sort of a nervous system thing, to foster the courage to take the steps the inside voice is directing. And I am not somebody that, I use this analogy often, I'm not somebody that believes you learn how to swim by being thrown in a pool. I think it's one really sweet, gentle, loving, safe step at a time. And you take that step and it feels uncomfortable and you can feel it all in your body. And then you acclimate and your body regulates. And then it's time to take another step. And that's, I think, when you have the support behind you and you have the belief and faith in your inside voice, it's just these sweet steps along the way, and that inside voice will always direct you in the right one, in the right direction. And so our job is to listen and to trust. And I think kind of put our little horse blinders on, so we're not seeing what's happening in the world around us, because that pulls us right back into our head, which is, always wanting to derail the inside voice. Whole reasons for that one too. But I do think it's a very loving, sweet, tender, step-by-step process.
I was on mute, sorry. I just want to listen to you and just kind of take it all in and feel like, yeah, it's going to be okay. And it is nice. I think me in particular, I'm surrounded by, I feel like I've told you this before, I'm surrounded by a lot of masculine energy at home, which is very much not that step-by-step sweet process. It's very much that don't complain, just get over it. Okay, you had a couple of days of rest, so you should be fine now. Why are you still not able to do X, Y, and Z? I'm kind of switching the topic now
I'm tracking, girl. I'm tracking.
Yeah. Well, I think where I want to go with that is, just for everyone listening, had a hysterectomy at the end of March, and I had a very large fibroid on my uterus. Ended up being 800 grams. And
Oh, my friend.
if you're not familiar with how much a uterus weighs, it's typically on average about 50 grams. So I basically had a baby's head growing out of my uterus. And I could feel it. Like you can, that's something that you can
Holy
feel,
cow. Yeah.
which comes with a whole host of all kinds of fun symptoms. And I've say fun very sarcastically. So I ended up having surgery to remove it. Like I said before, I'm 41. So my understanding of fibroids like this are, if you can make it through menopause, typically because of hormone fluctuations, a fibroid might shrink if you get through menopause and go away on its own. Well, I have no idea how long I have until I start going. It could be like 10 years. I could have been living with this thing, and I already lived with it we first found it in 2021. So I lived with it for about 3 years, and it just kind of like metastasized. It just exploded. Last summer, I felt it get really big really quickly, which was an interesting experience in and of itself. But the direction I'm going with this is, I think, twofold. What I've found interesting going through this journey myself as a woman, women's health is very underrepresented, I guess is the word I'll use. Doesn't seem to be taken as seriously. It feels like, to me in particular, with hormones and reproductive systems, the answer is, it feels like surgery more often than not, which to me is so radical. Having a surgery like that on the center of my core was the most invasive, radical thing I could have chosen, but the alternative options that were presented to me probably would have been better to just live for the next decade with this fibroid on my uterus. And so going through that experience, having to make that decision, and then, like I said, my home environment being what it is, it's been a really challenging time in my life, to say the least. I don't know how else to articulate it. I almost don't even have words to explain what it's been like. I do have a very supportive partner who did take time off of work, but it takes a village, it takes a village to get through something like that. And so what I think is interesting, Jill, and I'd be curious to hear your perspective on this, is just the conversation in general around menopause, perimenopause, women's health, why it's so underrepresented. I'm not sure if that's the right word, but I can't think of anything else. And every time I turned around, and I think even when I shared this with you, you were like, oh, I know someone who's going through that, or I might be going through it myself soon. And, my best friend just had this surgery. Another one of my closest friends is having this surgery next month. And every single person, every single woman I talked to and shared this with was like, me too, me too.
Yeah.
And I was just, I'm like, what are we drinking? What is in the water? What in the hell is happening?
I can't even tell you how timely this conversation is for me personally. I think, there probably is something in the water, right? Like, environmentally, there's got to be contribution to that. But I think more important, and I'm certain, we certainly see this in our political landscape right now. Women's healthcare is certainly on the decline. We're fighting for our lives, literally, these days. And I could go on that soapbox too, but it is, I think underrepresentation is a good word. I think complete dismissal might be more accurate. I think that we are starting to get a little traction, but I am in menopause now. And holy moly, what a roller coaster that is. And at every turn, I have a different answer. And I have all these crazy symptoms that people want to throw this drug at, or this procedure at, or tolerance for this stuff. And it is, all of my peers, we all have different experiences, and nobody can give us a straight answer. And then, and I think I heard this. I don't know that I read this, but there is so little money and research devoted to women's healthcare especially menopause, especially anything that is reproductively related, right? And yet, Viagra has been studied up one side and down the other. The armed forces pay for the research. Like there is, and I might be completely spewing, I don't know, conspiracy theories here, but my understanding is that it has full government backing. And you bet your bippy that if men had a 5-gram fibroid coming out of their reproductive areas, the government would shut down. Like, of course, there would be energy to there. So there is such, like, this is such a, it's such a fundamental human issue here. And I think that we are starting to get traction. I just read the other day that I think it's like Gwyneth Paltrow of Goop and Drew Barrymore and I don't remember the other people, but people who are, pretty famous and have resources and are, in the public eye have all contributed money or invested in a company dedicated to research for women during menopause and in these reproductive years, because it is so underfunded, it is so underaddressed, and it's so effing frustrating. It's we don't, I mean, gosh, I mean, my experience, I don't want to say, well, my experience, is worse or better than yours, but separately, it's a roller coaster ride for sure. I mean, from the really mundane, random things to the craziest things in the world. And I know, it's just really easy to say, menopause, I guess it's menopause, but is it? But nobody can tell me separately, and when it comes to, the physical, like, of your structure, I can't even imagine, Tessa, what carrying around 750 extra grams in your abdomen must have felt like. I can't even wrap my head around that.
Yeah.
I've held a baby's head, and I'm telling you what,
They're heavy.
they're heavy and they're big and
Yeah.
they're bulbous and they're, like, and I just, man, this riles me up. It's just so frustrating. I do feel like we're getting there, we're gaining traction, but talk about an uphill climb here,
Well, and the whole conversation around what I've been learning too is this whole conversation around what a normal period is, even thinking back to menstruating years, because now I don't have a uterus, so I don't have menstruation, which is a whole other conversation that is for me, it's a huge loss. I am someone who I feel like am kind of an anomaly in that I've always enjoyed my period. I've always felt that it was sacred. It was a time for me to slow down, connect. I felt very grounded. I felt very intuitive while on my period. And that has a lot to do with how I was brought up. My parents always taught me that it was something to be celebrated. So to make this choice to have a hysterectomy was not only a choice to basically have this major invasive surgery, but it was a choice to let go of something that I've cherished for my whole life, that I found sacred. And I will not bleed anymore. And to me, that's a loss and something to grieve. And while I was doing research and getting ready and just kind of like mentally preparing myself for this, what I found coming up a lot in conversation was, how normalized painful periods are. And that is not a normal thing to have happen as a menstruating women, from 15 years old to however long you menstruate for. Your period should not be painful. Your quote unquote PMS symptoms, there is something wrong. There's an imbalance in hormones if you're having that bad of a period where you have to reach for the hot water bottle or the whatever it is,
the hot
the
bath
Advil. There is something not right, even down to the color of the period blood being a dark blood or being a light pink blood. Again, that's something that denotes something to pay attention to. And I just learned all of this. Like,
okay, I didn't know that. I'm learning this as you're speaking, and that
because nobody educates us on this stuff.
Nobody tells us this stuff. I don't even know if anybody knows this because research hasn't been done enough. They don't dedicate enough, whoever the they is, enough time, money, resources to it. And Here
Yeah.
we are,
Yeah.
50% of the population running around going,
Oh, you're just
ow, and I
PMSing.
suck it up. And yeah, and
Yeah.
all the memes out there about PMS. And I think the other part of it too is, um, because, I mean, as you're saying this, I'm thinking, gosh, I just thought this was sort of part of it. My daughter, it's part of her process, right? Her world. And wouldn't it be so much more beautiful if we talked about it? If
Mhm.
if we were to say, hey, I don't think this is right. What is your experience? How do you experience this? But we really don't. It's another one of those things we kind of keep inside, right? It's not super polite conversation or whatever. It's uncomfortable conversation, I guess. And if we don't know that what we're experiencing isn't um, entirely healthy, I'd really love the opportunity to connect with the community around that. I would
Yeah.
feel supported and less frustrated and scared.
Well, and I like what you said about you do see it changing. You mentioned Gwyneth Paltrow and Goop and Drew Barrymore joining that conversation. And I have found some really great resources, two books that I'd highly recommend. One, Cycles by Amy J. Hammer, who is a doctor.
Okay.
And she writes all about the cycles of a woman's reproductive life into menopause. And that is where I just spend so much time with that book as a resource, and I recommend it to other women that I work with when I health coach, and I use it for myself too, like a dictionary almost, and also a balm to
Yeah.
my achy soul. So that's
Yeah.
one. I'll put that link in the show notes, and I highly recommend, if your daughter's experiencing something like that, anyone out there, I highly recommend this book. The second resource
Yeah.
is
Thank you.
In the Flow by Alyssa. I always pronounce her last name wrong. I want to say Vriti, but I think that's because of Sanskrit and the Vritis.
Okay.
So I think maybe her last name is
In the
Italian. So
flow though. Okay.
yes, yes.
Okay.
And these two women have researched and studied and are very much part of this conversation. So I highly recommend those resources. If you're going through it, know you're not alone. Know that you don't have to suffer in silence. Know that you don't have to normalize it by saying, "Oh, I'm just PMSing," because that is not a normal period. Um, so I wanted
And
to
I
ask
think it
you,
belittles the experience
it
too.
does. That's the problem. It belittles it, and it,
Yeah.
something that isn't normal, it shouldn't be normalized. And it
Yeah.
shouldn't be like, oh, well, you should just, tell everyone you're PMSing so they'll know not to, take anything personal if you snap at them. What the
Yeah.
fuck? Like,
Yeah.
have a human experience.
Yeah.
Um, But I do want to ask you, Jill, about going through menopause, if you
Yeah.
wouldn't mind sharing. You did
Sure.
start to talk about what that's like. I think it's a very important conversation, and I'm wondering if you're having hormone replacement therapy kind of stuff down
Mhm.
your throat, and how you're choosing to navigate through that, if you don't mind sharing.
Yeah, no, I would love to hopefully cast some light on some of this for somebody. It's interesting because I'm definitely in the throes of my own. I just came off a procedure as well, but I'll give you the background. And it's interesting too because my mom went through menopause in her 40s. I mean, I remember being in early high school and windows open in the middle of the like she it
Yeah.
went through it really early. And right around my 50th birthday, I started getting hot flashes and they were intense, but they tapered. And I really, again, because I have, a similar background to you where with yoga and I think just the coaching, like, okay, I'm going to really listen to my body here and kind of try to figure this out. And what I had come to was that I was going to just kind of play it out and write it out. And then they tapered. And I was like, whew, okay, dodge that bullet. Okay, good. And then about a year later, they came back. The hot flashes came back so fast and so furious that I was hot flashing up to 3 times an hour. Whether I was sleeping or during the day. So, like, literally, I would be in this conversation and my face would get bright red. I would be nearly naked because I've had to strip off everything. Within seconds, I'm freezing again and I'd have to cover back up. And so that was the most significant symptom I was having. And I had talked to a couple different doctors and naturopaths with that first bout and just more like gathering information. This time around, I ended up doing hormone replacement therapy because um, it felt so much more traumatic to continue with these hot flashes. I wasn't sleeping. I was so miserable. And for about, I think almost 6 months, I just was miserable. And so I ended up going on, I am on the estrogen patch and I was taking the progesterone pills. And within 2 weeks, I ballooned. And I don't say that, like, I don't really count calories. I'm not a big, like, I don't, body image isn't something that impacts me too much. I kind of, but it wasn't so much like, I mean, I don't know if you can see this. My breasts are enormous. They're like crazy size, but it wasn't just the fact that, I had gained weight. It's more like this swollen, uncomfortable. I didn't like things around my waist because it was so sensitive. Everything's so tender. And that was really weird to me, lots of achiness in my joints, lots of mental fog. Um, and so I got on the hormones and I think in about 6 months, I had gained a significant amount of weight and but the hot flashes had stopped. And I sort of was like, okay, well, that is like way lesser of the evils here. But they reduced my progesterone. We went down. We reduced the amount of estrogen and progesterone. Because the other thing that was happening to me was the progesterone was making me really loopy and sleepy. And I would wake up like I'd just been on cold medicine or something. So we reduced that. And then I started having breakthrough bleeding. So I don't know how technical you want to get. So I have been in menopause. I've been on hormones for almost 3 years now. And I had been in perimenopause, which means I hadn't gone a full year without a period. I just did this last February. And then I had breakthrough bleeding and I bled hard and for a really long time. And I am just coming on the other end of lots of ultrasounds and procedures to scrape out my uterus and they've inserted a progesterone IUD so that the progesterone it's more localized and it's not moving through my system. That was about 2 weeks ago. And I'm in tremendous amount of pain. I'm cramping, I'm bleeding, I'm 50 fucking 3. I should not be going through this. My period is synced up with my daughter's, which cracks me up. I'm like, hey, who's going to the store today? So it's a ride, man. It's a ride. And I really appreciate my doctor. I know she's doing the best she can, but I don't think she has all the answers. I am, like I said, I really try to rely on just sort of my internal compass and like you, I celebrate my menstrual cycle, right? Like I've had babies and that whole process to me was, I think, for most of us that have bared children, like life altering and transformative, and it gave me such pride in my body. I think that is why, like I, certainly thought about my appearance and my weight and that kind of stuff. But I tell you what, the first time I got pregnant and I was carrying this baby, it was so clear to me that the reason my body was developed was to have children. And so it was cool having this big belly. I mean, I just grew such admiration and respect for my body and the whole process. Um, and now it's just so up and down. It's so backwards. And it's interesting as you're talking to Tessa that there's a whole grief process with it, right? It's a really significant chapter being closed. And yet this new one that I'm entering, I don't know the terrain. And it's hard. It's frustrating. I know that all of my peers that are going through menopause, like I was mentioning earlier, have similar discomfort, but very rarely do our symptoms match up. It's all across the map. It's a very It feels frightening. It feels isolating. It feels frustrating. And then it's just plain comical at times. I mean, I'm like, holy cow, like, do they make bras big enough these days? I mean, it's pretty wild too. So gosh, I guess I went into a lot of detail there, but I am on the journey still. And I don't know where it's going to take me. And I'm very hopeful for better information. I'm very inspired to advocate much more for myself than I probably ever have, because it does feel so disconcerting. And it does feel like, kind of what you were saying at the beginning, which is, right, like, there's no sense of control around this. I have no sense of control. My health and well-being feels like it's in the hands of others who don't actually know what they're doing either. And so it's a really vulnerable place to be.
Yeah.
And the other thing I would say is I love being this stage in my life too. I feel like very rarely do things rattle me. I always say, like, I tolerate so much more. I accept so much less. Like, vice versa. Sorry, turn that around. I accept so much more. I tolerate so much less. Like, I don't really care what other people are doing and that kind of thing. But the second you piss me off, I don't have space for you. Like, I just, no is one of my favorite words these days. And it means that my community is smaller, but so much more authentic and genuine. And I like we were talking about, I feel rested because my energies, I don't feel the need to try to please people to the degree that I used to. And it was a large degree that I tried to do that. So there's a lot of power that comes from that too. And that excites me. It just comes with, man, it's murky. It's got a lot of complications to it physically.
Yeah. Oh, Jill, thank you for sharing so candidly. I really think it's important to have these conversations so that we feel, not prepared necessarily, but we remember that we're not alone when we go through these life transitions, and that hopefully it gives the invitation. It feels like, I can reach out for help. I can say how I'm actually feeling. I can be honest with something that's hard, and I don't have to whitewash it with, oh, I'm just going through, I'm just blah blah blah, whatever it is you complete that sentence with. No, it's a big fucking deal. This is a major thing, and it's been, I think we've justed it. When I say just, it's that qualification that it's, oh, you woman, just go be quiet and stop complaining. And that shit pisses me off. Okay.
Well, I think, you know what? This is why your platform is so important, and you're giving space to this, because the more we talk about it, the more mainstream it becomes. It's exposure therapy, basically. Like, you're going to have to get over it. This happens. 50% of the population experiences this. And I am too old and cranky to not speak my mind around it.
But I also
That's
love
like my
that
third TED Talk I've said to you on this on one podcast today.
TED Talks are so inspiring. I got the opportunity to go to TEDx in Portland last year, and it was life changing. It was so good. So I appreciate your TED Talks, Jill, and bring them on. I want to ask you a final question.
Yes.
And that is, looking, I know you have a daughter, so you could kind of frame it this way, but a conversation with your childhood self. And lately, when Rosie and I interview people on the Radically Love podcast, she's been using the 15-year-old lens of looking back on your life. What advice would you give? And usually, because it's radical love, it's all about, what would you tell yourself about love? I'm curious what you would tell yourself, your 15-year-old self, about getting to this stage in your life, going through menopause, aging, I almost don't even want to say aging with grace anymore, because that feels like a way to whitewash it too. But yeah, what would you say to your 15-year-old self about, I guess, aging in general?
Oh, embrace it. It's, I don't, I know people have work done, and I often look in the mirror and go, oh, maybe I should think about that. But man, it's so beautiful. And to minimize all of the incredible assets of getting older is so diminishing. I just am so grateful for the lessons I've learned, even though some were so bloody hard, and the woman that I have grown into as a result. And I would say to myself at 15, oh, baby girl, soak it up, take it all in, because everything that you are, gosh, this is interesting because I am actually having a conversation with my daughter right now. And this is so true. What I want to say to her is, baby girl, love yourself the whole way. Trust yourself above anybody else. You know the path, and take it all in, because it's the most glorious process. And I mean, I have a lot of life left in me. I will be here still. I will be your co-host for many moons still. It just keeps getting better. I feel more emotionally energized than I ever have. I feel more powerful than I ever have. And it took me all of these experiences in these days and years and decades to get here. And so I would say to her, baby girl, embrace it. It's beautiful. You're beautiful. Don't ever try to edit that.
I love that. Don't ever try to edit that. I'm bringing tears to my eyes. I'm feeling nostalgic for that time in my life when I was so judgmental of myself. I look back on pictures and I was like, oh my God, why were you being so mean to yourself? Just love yourself, learn to love yourself and trust yourself above all others. Oh, so good. Such great advice. Jill, I could sit here with you all day, and I just want to make sure that we're pointing.
Friend.
Yeah, right? Oh. I want to make sure we're pointing people still to the right place to connect with you on the socials and your website. And I'll definitely make sure those links get into the show notes, but do you want to say what they are here?
Yeah, you can always find me at jillrosecoaching.com. I'm Jill Rose Coaching on Instagram and Facebook. In addition to coaching one-on-one, I do work with women specifically. I also speak for different organizations and facilitate for large groups. And I do an annual retreat in the Joshua Tree area in February of every year. So if that interests you, love to have you.
Yes. One year I'm coming to Joshua Tree with you.
Oh my God. Could you imagine the magic we could create? That would be so wonderful.
I really want to go. Jill, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your grace and being so candid with us. I really appreciate you, and I love you being my sidekick.
Thank you. It's a privilege, and you know how much I love you and adore you. So thank you for having me.
Well, everyone, that concludes another amazing episode of Outside the Studio. I hope you enjoyed yourself. I hope you learned something new, maybe remembered something old, maybe felt inspired to apply something to your life. You can hear my dog in the background. She's doing a little happy dance. So Daisy enjoyed it. Anyhow, I wanted to just pop in here to wrap us up to say a couple of things. Number one, I have such an amazing team that helps me put these podcasts together. Without them, I wouldn't be able to bring these amazing conversations to you. So thank you to my producer, my director of creative services, my sound editor, my engineer, Consistency Media. Don't know what I would do without you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And the amazing creation and artistic musical genius, Drew Lovern. Thank you so much for putting together this music specifically for Outside the Studio. So unique to the show, only place you're ever going to hear it is right here. Thanks, you guys. You make my world go round. Stay well, everyone. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review, share on the socials, especially if it's a show that you think, hey, this could help somebody else. That's what this is all about, right? We're sharing information so that we're better so that we're inspired, so that we're lifting each other up, and we're learning how to be in this world, living on this planet to the best of our ability, sharing information and inspiring one another. And that's my hope. That's my hope for the show. Take care.